my pleasure to introduce the guest speakers for this evening. And I just want to say that while those members of the Montreal Lutheran Council who planned this evening were kind enough to include me on the email list, the work was all theirs and not at all mine, in the sense that they had the courtesy of including me in the email list and inviting me to participate in some way. But I come to it quite late. And yet have been given the pleasure of introducing the speakers, so I'm very thankful for that, and to the committee for giving me that chance. The Reverend, we start in a different order. Dr. John Faithful Hamer, who is familiar to many of you here, is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Religion at John Abbott College and also a member of this parish. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy from Johns Hopkins University. He's very active in the mobilization against the Charter of Quebec Values and now Bill 60. And gives me great pleasure to introduce him to you and to bring him to the podium. Please welcome him.
Good evening. I'm kind of nervous because this issue, I'm very sort of upset about this issue, so I can't talk calmly the way I usually do at work. But okay, this, I know this sounds perhaps kind of melodramatic, but this is really a very, very important moment for Lutherans in Montreal, Lutherans in Quebec, right? And the thing is, one thing we've been learning and studying how trust is built up between people and how it's lost, and how social trust is built up and lost, is that it doesn't happen gradually the way you might think. It happens in moments. Right? They're brief moments. You might see them as like tests, right? Where somebody does something and they gain your trust, or they do something and they lose your trust, right? Social trust. This is very much a moment for us. Right? Now, what haunts me through all of this is probably Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Right? And for those of you who are familiar with it, those of you who aren't, Martin Luther King Jr. had been jailed. While he was jailed, he wrote this long, long letter to the churches, primarily. Right? And very long thing. It was smuggled out of the prison. It was published in the New York Times and then in newspapers all over the world. And it's a very, very stinging indictment of the churches, and specifically the so-called kind of middle-of-the-road moderate churches. Right? And so that's it's in that letter where he has the famous line where he says, "We will have to repent in this generation and the next, not only for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people." Right? The appalling silence of the good people. Right? Not saying anything. Right? So this is a moment that we have where we can really bridge all sorts of communities that have been largely disconnected, have had very little to do with each other. Right? We can do the right thing in this situation. That's a rare opportunity. I mean, I know it sounds a little bit like a little bit perverse, perhaps, to look at something so horrible and see this as an opportunity, a good thing, but it is. Right? I mean, that's unfortunately that's just the way life works. Right? It's like, as Aristotle says, when it comes to friendship, you never know who your friends are until something goes wrong. Right? If everything's going great, you'll never really know if that person's like a real friend or not. Right? You could be just somebody that's useful to them or fun. Right? So this is our moment. So I guess the question then is, well, what exactly do we have to offer? Right? Well, first and foremost, we have just to get involved as citizens of Montreal, of Quebec, of Canada, and we should get involved for just those reasons, absolutely. But I still think that as Lutherans, we have something special to contribute that perhaps not everybody else would, right? two things. Okay? First one is that I think our tradition, at its best, I mean, Luther wrote a lot, which is unfortunately, right? It's like having a lot of stuff on the internet. You're eventually going to say something dumb, but he wrote a lot, and so yes, it's true. He made some very bad calls. That's true. But Luther, at his best, was Protestantism at its best, and was Christianity at its best, right? Which is a real focus on the sanctity of conscience, right? The faculty of conscience within each human being, right? Like, we talk about, all people are equal and human rights and these things. But most people talk about this don't really have a very clear idea of what it is that makes us all equal. If you ask them, well, why are we all equal? Like, they don't have a very clear answer, right? Christians should have a clear answer. Lutherans should have a very clear answer to that question, right? Now, the Christian conception of conscience and the sanctity of conscience comes to a large extent from the Roman Stoics. And the Roman Stoics believed in a kind of radical equality of all human beings. And for them, the equality of human beings was based on reason. Right? The fact that we all have this faculty, this capacity for reason. And in saying that, they were breaking with most of the philosophical traditions before them that had said that reason was something that only certain people had, like only men had it, or only some men had it, or only citizens had it, right? The Romans said everybody, male, female, slave, free, citizen, non-citizen, everybody has a reason, right? Now, when the Stoics were talking about reason, it wasn't reason like this Enlightenment, Cartesian, like very detached, cold reason. It was something much more like what Luther was talking about when he talked about conscience. Right? It's this capacity, we might call it free will. I didn't want to use that expression because free will is another one of these terms that's been used so much that it's almost meaningless often. But this sanctity of conscience, we have to defend this, right? And now if we are living in a society that is going to pass laws telling people to do things that violate their conscience, that's terrible. I mean, that's absolutely terrible. In fact, I don't think it's hyperbole if you look at Roger Williams, very interesting Christian thinker. He's the one who was kicked out of Puritan Massachusetts and was one of the founders of Rhode Island, and all the heretics and dissenters ended up in Rhode Island with Roger Williams. Roger Williams said that when you force somebody to do something against their conscience, right, he described that as soul rape, right? And he wrote many long treatises on this. And so he said it's very, very important. I agree with that. Now, the second thing that I think we can bring to the table, aside from the real focus on the sanctity of conscience, is a real understanding of what tolerance is all about. Right? Because I think, once again, tolerance is another one of these things. People talk about it, but they don't really have any idea of what it is. Right? It's very easy to be tolerant about people's views on a particular issue if you don't have any view on that issue. Right? It's very easy to be tolerant of religion, for instance, when you think it's all a bunch of, children's stories and it's silly, right? It's very easy. It's much harder to be tolerant when you actually really care about that thing, right? It's easy, for instance, I saw a hilarious example of this in the most recent Indiana Jones movie. I don't know if you've seen that, the Crystal Skull one. Well, in the movie, Indiana Jones meets this young guy, and the young guy is telling him, I don't want to go to school. And he says, follow your heart, drop out of school, it's all good. And then he finds out about halfway into the movie that it's his son, and he says, you can't drop out of school. Right? So it's very easy to be tolerant of people's decisions when you don't care about them, or you don't care about those decisions. It's much harder to be tolerant when you actually care, right? And I think Christians understand this. Right? People who actually have religious views understand that tolerance is not sort of an apathetic, I don't care, anything goes. Tolerance is, you tolerate the cold, right? You tolerate the heat. It's an act of the will. It takes some kind of inner response, right? So I think we need to remind, one of the things we can do is to remind people that tolerance is always an act of the will. And you could say, actually, in a larger sense, it's an act of love. Right? So these are things that I think we can contribute, and I think that we should. Right? But just to come back to my original point, because I think this is what I wanted to finish with, the first demonstration that happened against the proposed, when it was still called the Charter of Quebec Values, the first demonstration that we went to it, and Annalise and I, my wife and I, we were what propelled us to go. And I'm not totally proud to admit this, but I heard about it. But what really fired me up about it is the horrible things that I was hearing from my students, my Muslim students, the things that were being said to them and said to their family members, having lit cigarettes flicked at them, being spat at, being like afraid to go to the store by themselves. Having to go with other people because people in passing cars, I had one student, somebody in a passing car threw a can of Coke almost full at her head, right? And Annalisa, my wife, teaches at Dawson College. She was hearing the same things from her students. That really fired us up about it. So we went there and we're with our sons, Tristan and Indy, are 11 and 10 years old. And who did we see at the protest? But they're Sunday school teachers, right? We're sitting over there. And this had such a huge effect on Tristan and Indy, right? More than anything you have ever said to them in Sunday school. They've been in Sunday school since they were with you, since they were little kids. I don't think Christianity was ever as real to them as it was when they saw their Sunday school teachers and ran into them at that protest. Right? So that's it.
That might be the very first time that I've moderated a discussion for an academic who was under time.